But I do like the idea of angry dental hygienists. That actually did tickle me.
Okay.
So I kind of hope it happens.
No. I want my dental hygienist to be pleasant and happy people.
You want yours to be happy.
I don't want any angry dental hygienist anywhere in the world. Like, that's a terrible idea. Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So this week on the show, we're talking about ISFJ careers. And this actually came about during our Personality Life Path Mentorship Program. The reason we're doing this subject this week came about during that program. Because in that mentorship, what we're actually doing is we're working with a group of students to take the 8 Jungian cognitive functions. And each week, we're looking at one of these cognitive functions through the lens of it being an archetypical energy in the world that's represented in the world, but also represented in individual personality types. And some of us are wired to pay attention to some of these realities. And some of us, it's a little more challenged to pay attention to some of these realities, how you're wired. So you as an ISFJ listening right now, if you're going through the program, we would attune you to the ones that you're attuned to, and we'd say, here's the ones that are a challenge for you. Here's some strategies to overcome or mitigate some of the struggle they might bring to your life. So that's the program. And we're walking people through their life path, choosing which path they want to walk now that they know who they are based on interacting with these energies in the world. And we've noticed that people in this program, Antonia, are in the middle of a transition in their life. Some people are in a lifestyle transition. Some people are in a relationship transition moment, either preparing for, in the midst of, or have just gone through a relationship transition. But a huge percentage of people, part of this mentorship, are in a career transition moment. They might have been in a career for a while and they want to do a reset, like a recalibration of the career track they've been on, or they're starting out maybe in a new career or their first career. And so this is a topic of conversation. We thought, let's do a podcast series, talk about each of the 16 personality types, how it relates to careers. And we talk to you today as an ISFJ in the Myers-Briggs system. We're going to approach this from a very principle-based approach. We're going to look at it through 4 different what's called subtypes of the personality type of ISFJ. So Antonia, why don't you kick us off by just giving a real broad brush from this, and then I've got a list I want to go over right after that.
So we're going to talk about careers, ISFJ careers, through the lens of this concept of subtypes.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is it seems that our subtype, or sort of the flavor of the type that we are, has a relationship to our career and vice versa, meaning that there seems to be a bit of a nurture component to our subtype, or sort of the flavor style of our type that we show up as. And this includes ISFJ types. That the career we choose, because we spend so much time doing that. I mean, we're going to spend minimum 40 hours a week generally at our jobs.
Yeah.
And the problems we're solving there and the situations we run into over and over and the skills that those career paths ask of us are going to have an impact on, how we're showing up as an individual. And so these subtypes are really good to know and understand, because not only are we looking for careers that suit us as our personality type, in this case, an ISFJ is looking for careers that suit an ISFJ. You're also looking for careers that suit your subtype, and then also help you become a certain kind of person.
Yeah.
Because this is going to be a place where you spend a chunk of change of your time. So the career path you choose, it's not just, will I like that? It's what kind of person is this career path crafting me to become? And I think that's why the conversation around subtypes is very relevant to careers.
Before we dive way in, I did my research, Antonia. I've got my top 10 list for ISFJ careers.
Okay.
Now, as we talk about these subtypes, you're referencing, this is going to give that's going to give much more fidelity, but this is the top 10 list according to the internet.
Okay.
And you can already, if you're an ISFJ, you probably read one of these lists before. You know what's coming, most likely. So here is the top 10 list of ISFJ careers according to the internet. Number 1, nurse. Not a surprise, most likely, for the internet's offering. Number 2, elementary school teacher. Number 3, accountant. Number 4, human resources manager. Number 5, librarian. Number 6, administrative assistant. Number 7, social worker. Number 8, paralegal. Number 9, dental hygienist. Number 10, office manager. I was laughing at librarian just because it sounds so I mean, that sounds like so stereotypically a
Yeah.
stereotype.
Yeah, it is pretty, it's centered in there. And didn't we talk in a previous episode or one of the other episodes about how like it's actually really difficult to become a librarian? You need a ton of education.
Yeah.
And
Which I didn't know. That was,
Yeah.
you enlightened me on this, that librarians are like high level performers.
I think you have to have a master's or something in order to become a librarian.
I didn't even know it was a career option.
Yeah.
Let alone you had to have a mass training. Like I didn't know this.
Yeah, it's a big deal. So that's actually a pretty decent list. So far, when we read off the lists that the internet recommends, and that makes sense because it's been aggregated through
Of course.
hundreds of thousands, if not millions of different ISFJs talking about, the careers that they choose. But, and some of those have some crossover with these subtypes, but there are things on these subtypes list
Yeah.
that did not make that top 10.
Well, and you may be an ISFJ listening right now who you don't identify with traditional roles that ISFJs are told, well, you've got to have this job. And you're like, I have a way different job than
Yeah.
that.
I don't want to be a dental hygienist.
Yeah, my job's creative or interesting or like not that that's not, but like there's a bunch of other flavors of jobs and careers opportunities for ISFJs out there in the world.
We're going to get a salty dental hygienist coming on talking about how creative their career is.
I'm sure that can be creative. I'm so sorry. That wasn't what I was trying to say.
A bunch of angry dental hygienists.
I feel like talking about ISFJs, they typically understand the standards of culture and all of this. And I feel like I can't, like everything I say, I have to give like 20 different like footnotes
Yeah.
to make sure I can modify it to any possible configuration of another human on the other side. There's no like standard of how I could talk about anything right now.
Because ISFJs are so varied, or?
Well, yeah. But what I mean is like I said, the dental hygienist, like not creative, but I'm like, of course there's creativity to that.
Right.
I have to make so much more commentary on everything I say because someone might misunderstand it.
Right.
And assume I'm broad brushing something that I'm not, which
Right.
takes a lot of time. And I'm sure it's not thorough. That's what I'm saying.
I have a feeling that people with ISFJ preferences that follow us are probably hardy stock.
Yeah.
I think they're going to be okay.
Well, I'm talking to you, ISFJ, that just tuned in.
That's
We're
right.
cool.
We're cool.
You
We're
can
good.
follow us. It's good.
But I do like the idea of angry dental hygienists. That actually did tickle me.
Okay.
So I kind of hope it happens.
No. I want my dental hygienist to be pleasant and happy people.
You want yours to be happy.
I don't want any angry dental hygienist anywhere in the world. Like, that's a terrible idea.
Set them off on a bad foot
yeah.
before they go to work.
Yeah.
Aggressively cleaning teeth. Talking about that Joel Mark Witt.
Yeah. The CIA starts recruiting for black sites. Like, oh, you're an angry hygienist. We can inflict some torture on people. This is good. Let's do it.
You just went to a place that I cannot follow.
Okay. Okay. We got to get back to Dario. Not Dario. We got to get back to the list of subtypes.
Right.
For ISFJs.
Yes.
So the reason I mentioned Dario is Dr. Dario Nardi brought ISFJs into his laboratory and he connected them to EEG machines. And then he would watch as he ran different ISFJs through a series of exercises connected to brain scan software. He would watch how their brain scans lit up in their brain, the patterns of their brain scans. And he started to notice a pattern of 4 different ways that these brain scans would show up. And then he started to take that information and connect it to Dr. Helen Fisher's work, talking about neurotransmitters and chemicals in the brain, and developed this pattern noticing different expressions of the ISFJ personality type, 4 different expressions, what he calls subtypes. He was going to call them variants, but we know why he didn't choose the word variant at this point because it has total other implications.
Right.
Calls them subtypes. They're not types that you can get static or stuck in. These are expressions of you as an ISFJ. These aren't who you are. That's just the way you express. And there's reasons why they show up this way. And then he borrowed the terms from Dr. Victor Golenko, socionics guy, to use here as descriptors of these 4 subtypes.
Right. With permission.
With permission. So they are called, the ISFJ subtypes that we're going to talk about today are dominant, creative, normalizing, and harmonizing. And there's a bunch of different characteristics of each of these expressions of the ISFJ personality type. And we believe that by tuning into these different expressions of ISFJ, you're going to see some career paths emerge for you, whether they're tailored for your particular subtype that you identify with right now, or maybe a subtype you'd like to lean more into based on the career path you choose.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I do want to emphasize that point again, that your subtype isn't as much pre-wiring as your personality type. It's more the nurture component. So ideally, we could be, we could be able to visit all of these subtypes in a single lifetime.
Yeah.
And that gives us some options, right? It gives us a path, right? If we want to grow certain aspects of our personality, we could potentially choose a career, or at least a job for a time that helped bring those elements of us up. And then we can also find things that, if we don't want to change, right? We sort of like where we're at. We can better match career choices to the subtype that we're manifesting. And as I mentioned, that top 10 list that you read was pretty good, but there's a lot of other variations in career paths that are offered when you look at these 4 different subtypes. Oh, I did want to make one quick note, mention that if you're new to type and we're already talking about subtypes, we want to make this accessible to everyone. So I'm going to do my best to keep it as accessible to people who are just learning. But I'm also going to make a note when we're talking to like the type enthusiasts and the type geeks. So we'll do a little bit of both, and I'll always give a word of warning that I'm about to go into technical jargon. Okay, so the dominant subtype.
What does the dominant ISFJ subtype look like?
These are ISFJs that are oftentimes in a leadership position. They're good at shepherding people in organizations and playing a humanistic role, and they have a very in-charge style. So I wouldn't be surprised if these ISFJs maybe sometimes mistype as ESFJs or possibly even ESTJs. There's a very assertive quality about the dominant type, which is unsurprising because they're called dominant. They have a very strong halo of connections around the perimeter of their mind, which means that they have fast executive function. And so these ISFJs, in comparison to others of their same type, are going to be faster decision makers. They're still going to have ISFJ preferences, so it doesn't mean that they're going to make as fast decisions as maybe some other types. But within the cluster of people similarly wired to them, they're going to be a bit faster. And they're doing it in a way that communicates confidence. So they're making faster decisions than maybe some other ISFJs, and they're doing it with a sense of confidence, which is one of the reasons why they tend to seek leadership positions, because those are qualities we're looking for in leaders. They also are good at building rapport. They're very good with planning. They think conceptually, and they trust values. They have strong managerial skills as well. Some of the things that they tend to be very good at is they're really good communicators. So they actually are pretty good public facing, and they use language to help in reasoning. And they also are really good with body awareness, especially if they go into anything that has to do with the arts or anything physical or technical. Then they usually produce very good body awareness. And they also have a capacity to, their minds have a subtle starburst sort of flavor to them, which means that their whole minds light up when they're considering a problem, as long as they feel relaxed. So if they're in a good space, they have easier access to their intuition.
Yeah.
And so they can think creatively as long as the situation isn't stressful in any way. And so because of that, there's a lot of different things that they qualify for. So some of the specific careers that are good for people who have dominant ISFJ preferences is that things like nonprofit management, healthcare administration. So this could be like managing a medical center or overseeing the budgets for a medical center. Human resources, which is one of the ones that you mentioned, school administration, like overseeing curriculum development or teacher training, even not just being like the school teacher themselves, but overseeing some of these capacities, event planning, public relations. So like managing an organization's public image or coordinating media relations or communicating with, stakeholders. These would things that would be in their wheelhouse. And then consulting, right? Any sort of management consulting that allows them to use their mind to help a company ameliorate what's going on.
I have a question that's not direct communication. It's a thought that came up to me just now. How much do you believe a dominant ISFJ is dependent on the structure to have their back to be dominant? In other words, can they be dominant outside of a system? Do they need a system as a ballast or some authority structure underneath them to awaken this dominance?
I think that they definitely thrive when they are in an institution or have an infrastructure that helps support them. there are some ISFJs that might even dip their toe in entrepreneurship, but the dominant ISFJ didn't seem as keen on that.
Yeah.
This is more an ISFJ that's using what's already sort of been established to go in there and communicate expertise, sort of bridging relationships, making sure that there's a polish to it, making sure that there's a high degree of good communication and that the ship is running smoothly.
Yeah.
So I think dominant ISFJs are not necessarily the ones that are going to go start businesses, although they could do that as well. There have been some dominant ISFJs that have built empires. But I think for the most part, they're really good at getting the skills they need. They're lifelong learners, and they're very good at gaining the status they need as well. So climbing up the ranks, gaining all the skills and learning they need, and making sure that they are always well respected. Yeah. And that's done best, I think, in an institution.
Yeah. So if you're identifying with a dominant ISFP subtype, often you will probably want to look for an organization to join, something to be a part of that's greater than you, that's bigger than you, that you can be inside of, to then let all of these characteristics and qualities come out.
Right.
All right, so let's go a little bit into the depth of this for type geeks that are following along.
Okay.
The neurotransmitter that is associated with the dominant subtype for all dominant subtypes, and also for the ISFJ dominant subtype, is testosterone.
Right.
And then there is the cognitive functions of the ISFJ. So the driver or dominant cognitive function, different word dominant to describe this, is introverted sensing, or what we've nicknamed memory. This is how an ISFJ perceives their world. They take in new information and they make their decisions using extroverted feeling. This is their co-pilot or auxiliary cognitive function. We've nicknamed that harmony. It's about getting needs met. It's about ensuring that people are getting along, all the needs are met in a group. It's about social interaction and all of this. So that's how an ISFJ is moving through the world. There's an attunement of these functions that indicates that they are a dominant subtype.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little about the general principle of attunement, and then what does this look like for an ISFJ specifically?
Okay, so for the type geeks out there, there is a preference for what's called analytical version or analytic versions of each of those functions. So if you want a more of a deep dive, we recorded an entire episode with Dr. Dario Nardi about these subtypes and how they work. I would recommend going and checking out that episode. It's very interesting, and he breaks down sort of the science behind all of this, the quote-unquote math behind it. Not really math, but you know what I mean. Yeah. So each of the cognitive functions can have an either analytic or a holistic preference. An analytic is a more targeted, sort of focused, it's a very assertive way of experiencing the function. It's kind of like it's almost got blinders on because it knows its direction and it's heading towards it. And then the other option would be holistic, which is a more open frame. It's not as assertive. It doesn't have as much push out energy. It has more of like a broad spectrum, but it's not as focused on anything. It's more sort of receiving or like looking at a bigger picture through the lens of the function. Dominant ISFJs have a preference for both their functions, both introverted sensing memory and also extroverted feeling harmony, to be analytic. And that's part of the drive, is that they're sort of focused and driven and assertive to get that focus accomplished.
Let's talk about the ISFJ creative subtype.
All right.
What's the characteristics here?
This is a very different subtype from the dominant. This is a more artistically inclined ISFJ, particularly with music. That's where they tend to land, is with musical arts, but any art really. They like to feel sufficiently secure so that they can take an open, flowing, inspired approach to their work and life. So they are still ISFJ, so they have to establish that beachhead of feeling sufficiently secure. But once they do, they actually have a preference for things being kind of more open-ended and sort of breezy. This ISFJ might mistype as an ISFP or even possibly an INFP. This is the type that really sort of sees themselves as having more perceiver-like qualities, even though they're still judgers. And because of their preference for this, they have the most prominent, that starburst I was talking about, which kind of lights up the whole brain when you're thinking creatively. Of the 4 ISFJ subtypes, they're the strongest with that. So they're the most creative thinkers of all the 4 subtypes. And as mentioned, they have a tendency when they go into the arts to enjoy things like music. But it's not just like classical music or something to that effect, which might be a bit stereotypical. It's more like things like jazz, right? It's kind of that open-ended sort of, improvisational way of experiencing art and auditory art especially. And they make good composers. And they make pretty good bandmates. They're pretty good at following and leading and just sort of being a part of the process. But of course, they are still they're still planners, right? They're planful. They're ISFJs still. And so they have some things that help ground them. They have some strengths in comparison to other creative subtypes, in fact. Some creative subtypes are like all over the place and they really need a lot of grounding. This kind of ISFJ is actually pretty grounded, considering. And so they have a set of digital routines that they usually tap into to make sure they feel sufficiently secure in order to be able to bring out their best creative ideas if they're in a good space. And they also are very in touch with their bodies. They're in touch with their feelings, their sensations. They're good at catching people's expressions, moods, meanings, particularly if they have a lot of shared history. And because of that, again, they might mistype as maybe INFP types because it feels there's a lot of crossover here with some of the descriptions. But unlike the dominant ISFJs that are fast decision makers, for ISFJs, these are slow decision makers. It's very difficult for them to come to a conclusion or make a decision. And because of that, they tend to not have great executive skills. They tend to not get as much done. They have a harder time finding a foothold in like the thing they're trying to accomplish. And they tend to be quite quirky, right? They don't have that sort of like these are good citizens and good workers, which is sort of a stereotype that we have around ISFJ types. They don't identify with that as much. They are more independent thinkers. They're more people who work solo. And so because of that, they might be mistyped. Some of the specific careers, though, that are good for this ISFJ are things like musician, composer, right, obviously. But also other things in the arts, like a decorator, maybe like an events decorator or a home decorator. A graphic designer is popular. Art therapist, a person who maybe creates crafts and sells it on Etsy is probably the style of ISFJ. They can also get into writing, right, freelancing. There's quite a few poets that may be creative ISFJs. And things like becoming a fine artist with their attention to detail. Chef, baker was also on the list. And somebody who teaches crafts, right? Like a craft teacher. So something that allows them to be around whatever is inspiring them and then, turn it into like a legit career.
So the thing that's coming up for me, if you're listening along as an ISFJ and you're identifying with the creative subtype, if you notice, many of the career choices that Antonia mentioned can be supported with a platform. So being an Etsy creator, designer, selling on the Etsy platform, for example, time of this recording, that's a popular platform, you can create your crafts and then now there's a marketplace. So you're plugging yourself in not to a organization like maybe the dominant subtype would do, ISFJ dominant. ISFJ creative can find an outlet for that creativity. And because of the digital age we're in with YouTube and all of the social media platforms and places like Etsy and Uber and all these platforms that help commerce happen, there's probably more opportunity than ever for ISFJ creatives to not have to just go and get a job at a company. They can actually be the creative that they are and publish on these platforms, which is awesome. So just keep that in mind. If you're like, oh, that's a great career opportunity for me, that's something to be thinking about, those platforms moving forward. Let's talk about the depth of this for people that are a little bit more into cognitive functions. The neurotransmitter associated with the creative subtype is dopamine. How are the functions, introverted sensing memory and extroverted feeling harmony, how are these two functions attuned for the creative subtype?
Okay, so for the type geeks out there, for creative subtypes, it's the perceiving function that's analytic and the judging function that's holistic. So in this case, introverted sensing or memory would be the analytic function. It's more focused. It has more of a drive. But the judging function, in this case, extroverted feeling or harmony, that's more open framed. It doesn't have as much certainty. It doesn't have as much assertiveness. And so that's one of the reasons why this type tends to be more creative, because it pursues things that are, sort of fuel its mind. But at the same time has a harder time coming to specific conclusions about what to do with that information, making executive choices. That extroverted feeling of harmony usually is pretty good at helping ISFJs do. So this is one of the reasons why they show up a little bit more perceivery. But at the same time, they're still ISFJs.
Let's talk about the third subtype for ISFJs. We've talked about the dominant. We've talked about the creative. Now let's talk about the normalizing subtype.
Okay. So this is the ISFJ that probably knows they're an ISFJ. This is more I would say the stereotype in people's minds. These ISFJs are careful, caring, conservative. They're responsible protectors. And they are, they're good at sort of merging with the rest of society. Unlike the creative type that we just talked about that tends not to have the wiring of being like the diligent worker, this is the exact opposite. This is the ISFJ that totally has that brain wiring. They're very much diligent and good citizens and good workers. Yeah. And they tend to be very linear in their thinking. They are good at sort of understanding how to work through a thought process, but it takes time. So unlike the dominant ISFJ that makes faster decisions, or the creative ISFJ that kind of bounces around a little bit more and sort of is more open-ended, this is an ISFJ that takes in information, doesn't make really fast decisions on it until it really thinks it through. And so they are, they're very reflective. They have a very strong reflective side. But they're also good with their senses, right? They're sensing types. They have good body awareness. They're usually good at using language. They're good, at least understanding reason through language. They might not be proficient communicators in the sense that they're verbose, but they can usually get what another person is talking about. They have high listening comprehension. And they usually are good at being attentive to details and facts in a situation, particularly like the emotional tenor of a situation, or maybe even its artistic merits, right? Like being able to size up a situation and kind of be able, know whether or not that's going to be pleasing to others. So they are specialists as a general rule. They tend to have specialized careers. And so some of them, some of the common ones are things like accounting, anything in charity, editing, fine arts, library science. Librarian was on your list.
Library
Nursing.
Science?
Library science. That's what they call it.
I just realized that's probably in like universities, research facilities. That's probably when they're talking about a career as a librarian. Mm-hmm. That's what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. Something gets you that like advanced paper you're looking for to do something for your PhD. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I'm bearing out my ignorance of the
this
world
whole library thing is just throwing you for
of the world of libraries.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to like find this. I'm like, okay, I gotta figure out this library thing.
Somehow the fact that librarians require a master's degree is just blowing your mind.
Yeah.
There's like this whole world, because that wouldn't be the
yeah.
case unless there was like a whole world of information to be known and
Yes.
you haven't quite tapped into what that could be.
Yes.
Somebody needs they need to educate you. Somebody, whoever is a librarian that's listening, if you are a librarian, come let Joel know why it requires a master's degree.
Yes.
And so he can finally close this loop. All right. So librarian was on there. Nursing, which was the very first thing that you mentioned, but also anything in psychology is usually kind of interesting to people of this type. And then, administrative assistants or secretarial work. I also noticed that technical writer was on the list of, what might appeal to this sort of ISFJ. So these are like the conscientious hard workers that are good at their job and like to be specialists in their field. So they're people who can almost fit anywhere and really excel at it.
So you might have said this and I blanked out in the midst of you saying this, but the stereotype also is, and I'm saying there's a stereotype. I don't know if this is true, but a career choice for an ISFJ would be a stay-at-home parent to maintenance a house, whether a dad, mom,
sure,
they'd stay home and manage the home front. And it's not a paid career, but I think it's got the same requirements as a career.
For sure.
I didn't see that on the list. Did you skip over it, or is it?
I didn't mention it, but what's so fascinating about that is it's almost like you have precog. There is one thing that is noteworthy about this kind of ISFJ,
okay.
And that is no matter what kind of career or job they pursue, home is where the heart is. This is an ISFJ that is very devoted to family, to their close friends, to community and community work. So even if they have a career in something they really enjoy, their heart is with their family, the community, and that sort of thing. So they're never going to be all 100% in on any career unless it's something like that. So I think, like a stay-at-home parent or somebody who manages a home, that's something that would very much, be up this style of ISFJ's alley.
Yeah, and the other thing that comes up for that is in our new modern world where so much work is done from home online, there's a unique opportunity for maybe an ISFJ to have a sense that their career and their home are in the same place now. And maybe that's a very interesting development going forward that we haven't really gotten to see as much.
Yeah.
But based on technology now, that's possible.
Yeah. As I mentioned, this type is probably the type that knows they're an ISFJ, but they could think that they have ISTJ preferences. There's some crossover there. And they are quirky. All ISFJs are a little quirky. And they're no different, but they are a little suspicious of anything that flies over their head. So it's like they're quirky to a point. But yeah, so I can get into the technical stuff. I can be the geek.
Yeah. So the neurotransmitter is serotonin.
Right.
And what do the two function attunements look like?
So for normalizing subtypes, it's the reverse of the creative. It's the perceiving function that is holistic and the judging function that's analytic. So in this case, introverted sensing or memory is going to be the more holistic, open, sort of receptive function. And that makes sense because they're receiving information about culture and how culture is around them. And then they're filtering it through the judging function of extroverted feeling or harmony as their analytic function. So once they sort of figure out that reflective side that takes in information and really ruminates over it. Well, once they figure out how to sort it, then they're very analytic about making sure that it gets established the way that, that it should be, right? Like this is how this should play out. So I'm going to be a champion for making sure it happens.
Okay. We've talked about the dominant ISFJ subtype. We've talked about the creative ISFJ, the normalizing ISFJ. Now let's talk about the harmonizing ISFJ subtype.
Right. Okay. So this is going to be one of the furthest away from the stereotype, perhaps. Maybe not. I think we tend to attract a lot of harmonizing ISFJs. That's my guess. And so you listening, if you are an ISFJ, this might be your subtype. And harmonizing, not always, but harmonizing subtypes tend to be older, right? Not the rule of thumb, but sort of the observation has been that creative subtypes tend to be younger, not always, but they tend to be younger, and harmonizing tend to be older. And then it's kind of a mixed bag with the dominant and the normalizing. So harmonizing ISFJs are gifted, humanistic, and notably sensitive. They are very tapped into whatever's the human dimension of something, and they have deep concern for that. And they work really well one-on-one. Right, they're not group, they're not the PR agents that are going to be the representative spokesperson for, a company like the dominant might be. This is the opposite of that. This is a more intimate one-to-one relationship style of ISFJ. But they are usually good at blending sort of this artistic and technical side into specializing or becoming a specialist around something. And the challenge with talking about any harmonizing type is that they're usually very specialized, right? Like one ISFJ that's a harmonizing subtype might look kind of different from another, depending upon what they have chosen to focus upon. But some typical things, right? Like not all of them, but some typical characteristics of a harmonizing ISFJ is sort of the ability to process social feedback in an open-ended way. So kind of understanding where the person is coming from and really meeting them where they're at and understanding the implications of what they're talking about. Also being able to think in a holistic way by attending or when attending to people's vocal tonality, their facial expressions, really kind of honing in on an individual and understanding what that might mean holistically for them. And then also it's very common for harmonizing ISFJs to have really good visual artistic skills. So unlike the creative that tends towards auditory, right, music, this is a style that when they're creative, they tend towards the visual. Not always, but it's a trend, not a rule. And generally, they're good at seeing possibilities. So they have a little bit of that starburst, but they're not good at making decisions at all. And so they don't always know what to do with the information that they're ruminating upon. They tend to have very keen minds. They're comfortable with complexity. In fact, they might even kind of enjoy complexity. And they are, very good at bringing sort of a philosophical, sensitive, vulnerable expression to situations to help diffuse them. So they're not aggressive, they're not assertive, they're not like making things happen. But when they show up, there's a kind of a magic about them that helps navigate through situations. But if they're in unfamiliar situations where they are expected to make choices or perform, they can feel very awkward, very exposed. They hate being forced to make any choice, right? So it's one of those things where they kind of have to show up and express magic as opposed to being sort of forced to do it, if that makes sense. So when choosing careers, there's going to be things that follow those trends. So counseling is a big one, right? Like any form of counselor is usually very popular with this kind of style. But things also like film editors is on the list, portrait painters, media interviewer, maybe not the PR person, but somebody who's interviewing another person and really pulling out a lot of great content from them. But art therapist is on the list, UX designer, so user experience designer, somebody who's really getting inside of like somebody else's experience and tailoring it to them and really understanding how a user wants to interact with a product. I've also got on here museum curator, personal care aide, and archivist. These would all be probably really good suiting this style of ISFJ.
Yeah, what I'm noticing is they're probably the most likely to show up intuitive, like they would be mistaken for an intuitive often.
Yeah.
Because of just how much they're attuned to the woo-woo of everything, I guess is the best way to say it. That's maybe not a technical way to say it, but
well, I think that they are going to have less strong opinions about how things all should be set up. They're a lot more receptive, a lot more kind of sort of, just accept what's happening and do their part in showing concern for the situation. But they don't have probably a lot of very definitive opinions on how everything needs to be set up.
Yeah.
And they also enjoy complexity. And so they might mistype as an INFP as well. But also, I think this is probably the type that's most likely to think that they have INFJ preferences.
Yeah. So when we talked about the dominant subtype of ISFJ, we talked about possible leadership opportunities to take the lead, to be in management, take charge of a situation. We talked about the creative subtype being platform oriented, like YouTube, Uber. It doesn't have to be, but these are some tendencies for career tracks. The normalizing, getting a job is probably a very beneficial opportunity for a normalizing ISFJ.
Yeah, just about anything they can figure out.
Yeah, and by the way, all these are trends and these are just some general things, but harmonizing, it sounds like the network of people you're tapped into.
Yeah.
That not just the people you associate with, but they have to be able to see your value, your nuanced value as a harmonizing ISFJ. Because you're not out there promoting yourself of like, hey, I've got this value to contribute to other people. So getting yourself into a network of people, a tribe, a community of people that know what you bring to the table. Now they can help put you forward and bring you to those opportunities, quote unquote, market you in a way.
Yeah.
I think that's really a key here. If you identify with this harmonizing, you might want to choose careers that allow you to connect with people that can help augment your value and bring you forward into the world.
Yeah. And something that requires like good taste.
Yeah.
Right. Something that not everybody can do because you have to have this really interesting intersection of skills.
Yeah.
That requires like refinement,
complex coordination,
like the refinement and the good taste and the ability to come in and sort of observe a situation and know what it needs in order to make it beautiful or what this person needs in order to feel heard. So it's hard in a situation where like it's real competitive and everybody's like, like this would not be somebody who's vying for salesperson of the month, right? Like that's not the situation that is really going to bring out their best. It's more like a situation where like, I almost think of like this type would make a very good sommelier, right? Like something that is hard to do takes a lot of time and dedication and refinement and heightened senses and right. Like something that really like you have to really have good taste. So finding whatever is the sommelier version of your industry, of the thing that you enjoy, what is something that like just most people can't do because it just requires so much refinement and so much taste and so much skill and patience development over time. And then it's not something where you have to necessarily sell yourself. You're one of the few people who has that capacity.
Yeah. From a neurotransmitter standpoint, the harmonizing ISFJ favors estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk about those two front functions: introverted sensing memory, extroverted feeling harmony. Mm-hmm. How are they attuned for this subtype?
So in the harmonizing subtype, they both have holistic bent. So both introverted sensing memory and extroverted feeling or harmony, both of them are more receptive, more open, more sort of taking it as it's coming and understanding the bigger picture, as opposed to being more targeted and assertive and having blinders on. So this is an ISFJ that if they let themselves becomes just almost like a bird of paradise in what they can do. The challenge is that they're going to have maybe some difficulty with assertiveness and, like you said, selling themselves or finding those opportunities. So they're going to have to, they're going to have to take this thing that they know how to do and figure out a way to like interface it with the world.
So we've been talking about the 4 subtypes of the ISFJ personality: dominant, creative, normalizing, harmonizing. It's important to remember that these subtypes are not your personality. They're not static. You're not locked into these as an ISFJ. One way to look at it is if ISFJ is the song, the musical notes written on a music sheet to play on the piano or guitar or whatever, the subtype is the expression of that song. That's the performance of it. So whatever instrument you're playing and the performance of it, the scale of it, that's the subtype. Meaning that you're not locked into one of these for your entire life. This is a flexible process of moving between these subtypes. And there's some level of maturity that comes into here. Maturation means that you move more likely throughout life into more of like a harmonizing, for example. As you get more mature, you relax a little bit more, you're more open to more things. Over time, you might flex and flow between these subtypes. And your career choice also will influence the subtype you show up as. So let's say you started out life maybe as a normalizing ISFJ, but you found yourself ending up in career choices that put you in leadership over and over and over again. Well, this will start to attune your cognitive functions in your brain to being more dominant because you have to be. So your subtype can shape your career and your career can shape your subtype. It's important to remember these things work in tandem throughout your life. And I think the ultimate thing, Antonia, we're looking to help you as an ISFJ do in your life is to be able to access all of this when the context needs it. So whatever career you want or need to go toward, you have these energies in you to pull on, to bring out, to amplify, to be more flexible on your career trajectory.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the really important thing is that none of this is fixed. We always have a capacity, one, to make choices that help us grow, but also to expand our horizons. And it's really good to have information like this that helps as a guide, right? Like to give us some direction, but don't feel locked into anything. Don't feel like it's like a prescription, like you have to go do this. There's just qualities and characteristics that might suit you a little bit more. And part of why we wanted to go through all four of these is to remind people that they have more options, right? It's like, oh, I'm an ISFJ. Does that mean I have to be an elementary school teacher? It's like, no, you could go be, a sommelier someplace. Like there's a lot here. And I would say that ISFJs also have an advantage that because they use the function of introverted sensing or memory for the type geeks, because they use that function, there is a capacity to figure out almost anything with enough time. You just need the time to be able to learn it. You just need the time to be able to build the skill and familiarize yourself with that, with that territory. And so it's almost hard to say what ISFJ should do because the sky's the limit as long as they have the time to invest in becoming really good at that thing. And then if possible, sort of crossing it over into things that they have interests around.
So what do you think? You've been listening along as an ISFJ, or maybe you have an ISFJ in your life. We're talking about careers, and we're talking about the 4 subtypes of the ISFJ personality type and how it influences the career path you choose. We want to hear from you. You haven't had a microphone, but you've been the third person in this conversation. come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode, offer a comment, your perspective. Experience is better than opinion as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
I would love to hear your experience, your story of your career. Are you just starting out? Are you in university? You're ready to graduate, you're ready to move on to, or high school, and you're ready to go into your career life, and you're just on the edge, the precipice of this new adventure. Or maybe you've been doing a job or a career for a while, you're ready to make a change, or you've been doing something for a long time. It's been your vocation, your career, it's your identity in a way. And maybe there's a moment right now that you're going, I don't know if this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to do a transition moment here. And so you're hunting and exploring new career opportunities. Where are you at in your journey? We want to hear from you. Again, come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Make your voice heard.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. You can subscribe to us on YouTube and watch this podcast in video form. You can like it, subscribe to it, and hit the bell, and it'll let you know when new episodes are available. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review for that book on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And if you would like to know if you have ISFJ preferences, this might be something that we brought up material that makes you question whether or not you are an ISFJ, or maybe you thought you were and maybe you're thinking maybe not, or the opposite. Maybe you thought you were a different type, but you're listening to this episode and you're like, maybe I'm a harmonizing ISFJ. I don't know. Head over to personalityhacker.com and you can take our free online assessment that helps you on the path to figuring out your best fit type. And we have a fantastic program available for people with ISFJ preferences called the ISFJ Owner's Manual. This is a program that deep dives into your personality type and helps you understand what it means to be pre-wired to see the world the way that you do. We talk about all the tech geeky stuff, as I mentioned, right? Sort of deep dives into these cognitive functions, what they mean for you. But we also discuss things like your flow state and making sure you stay in flow, and maybe some of the challenges to staying in there that are throwing you out. We talk about phenomena that might keep you locked into a loop in your mind, maybe not bringing out your best self. And we talk about some of your fixations and some ways to become the best version of yourself. So I can't recommend this program enough. We spent years in development. It's been a labor of love, really. And I would say that these ISFJ Owner's Manuals are some of the best content that we've created. So highly recommend you head over to personalityhacker.com and go check out that Owner's Manual.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.